and I have started the recording.
Hello, everyone. This is Jose Rivera, CSIA CEO. Thank you for attending the July CSIA webinar. Today's webinar will provide you with bottom line automation, making the financial case for investment in automation. This is the second of a series of webinars on this topic. Be sure to ask questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box. Questions will be answered during the webinar, so be sure to ask them. The webinar will be archived for later viewing. The host and sponsor of our monthly business topic webinars is Software Toolbox, a CSIA partner member. Software Toolbox understands that you're not just buying software licenses, but are investing in a relationship where you depend on your suppliers to be there every step of the way. Software Toolbox encouraging its integrator partners to think carefully before writing custom code. Custom one-off applications are filled with risk and hidden costs when evaluated over the typical 10-year automation system lifecycle. Software Toolbox highly configurable, off-the-shelf software products and support services are proven to lower system integration risk. This month, they're highlighting the Cogent Data Hub. Just like the human brain, Cogent Data Hub provides a multi-purpose nerve center transforming process data into usable information. An intuitive interface connects multiple sources into accessible, secure formats. Thousands of installations have proven its bulletproof design. The adaptability of Cogent Data Hub never fails to impress. Learn more at softwaretoolbox.com/Cogent Data Hub. I would like to introduce today's webinar presenter, Dr. Peter Martin, Vice President and Fellow at Schneider Electric Company. If you attended our 2015 Executive Conference, you'll remember Peter as the closing speaker of the event. Dr. Martin presented the first webinar of the series earlier this year in August. So without any further delay, here's Dr. Peter Martin.
Thank you, Jose. It's great to be with you all today. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with me and to take another look at the value of automation. As some of you may know, I provided the first in this series about 2 or 3 months ago and really laid out a very high-level view of how we can actually get and measure more value from automation. At that time, it was really kind of a conceptual overview. What I'd like to do today is get into the details of the process you would follow to actually do this. So I'm going to start by reviewing some of the material that we covered back in the previous webinar, just to set the stage and to set context for this discussion. So I'll take a look at what we did in the previous session. We talked about some barriers to getting value. Now, I want to be clear. I think that automation technology, automation systems and controls effectively applied can generate more value for industrial companies than almost anything they can do. It's a great investment, and for us to make our industry healthy, we've got to start making sure that people get the value from automation. But there have been some things that have been prevalent over the last 30 to 40 years that have stopped either, one, the value of automation from being realized, or two, it being visible. So if people can't see the value from automation, then it really didn't exist. I mean, when you start looking at accountants, when you start looking at chief financial officers, the truth is they believe what they see. If they don't see the value, it never happened. So I'd like to take a look at some of the barriers. We covered this last time, so I'll overview this very quickly, and then how you break these barriers down so that we can actually realize value from automation. The first one we talked about was the technology focus. Since the introduction of the digital computer as the delivery vehicle for control solutions, our whole industry shifted from being focused on how to apply controls to get value to being focused upon what's the new technology capability that's coming down the line. Is it expert systems, computer integrated manufacturing, or getting more current the Internet of Things, the Industrial Internet of Things, cyber physical systems. We became so technology focused that as an industry, and that includes both the suppliers of automation, systems integrators, and by the way, as well as the end users, we became so focused on technology, we tended to forget or lose the sight of the fact that the technology existed to deliver solutions that drive value. So I believe we've reached an inflection point right now where we can go back to our focus of the 1960s and 70s, which was a pure solution focus. How can we drive solutions to the customer's business that will net real business results? The second barrier we identified was replacement automation. And this has really to do with the client, the customer's capital budgeting process. The capital budgeting process in place today actually serves to eliminate or reduce the amount of value that automation can provide. And the reason is, especially when you're dealing in brownfield environments, when a plant recognizes that an old system or an old software solution is getting old and they want to replace it, they have to apply for capital. To apply for capital, they typically define exactly the solution that they're replacing, down to the number of inputs and outputs, the number of graphics, the whole bit, and they go and get a budgetary quote from a supplier or a systems integrator. They take that budgetary quote and they ship it in a request for capital. And they make some estimate about what the return on investment is going to be. If that capital is approved, it's approved to cover exactly the system that's being replaced. So what ends up happening is a new system is put in to replace an old system, but it performs the exact same function in the exact same way that the old system performed, and therefore, in reality, it drives no value. We've got to learn how to break this replacement automation perspective. The third barrier is the project team approach. Some of the best talent in industry finds its way onto project teams, whether they're client project teams, systems integrators, supplier project teams. Some of our best engineering talent is on project teams. And unfortunately, the way project teams are measured in the capital budget process, again, is by on-time, on-budget delivery. The project teams are seldom, if ever, measured on the amount of economic value that they can drive to the bottom line of the plant. If you take your best talent and you tell them, don't worry about creating value, they won't. They have to live up to their measures. We've got to do something to make sure that project teams are set up so that if they get great ideas, that will drive value, that they're given the degrees of freedom to do it. And the fourth barrier, which is actually both good news and bad news, is business measures don't exist that actually make the value of what we do visible. The reason that's good news is because it hides the difficulties created by the first three barriers. If project teams aren't creating value, because we're not measuring the value that's created, nobody knows they're not creating it either. So it creates an environment where people are not accountable for driving bottom line value. The bad news, though, is my experience is that automation and project teams and engineering drive a tremendous amount of value. As a matter of fact, I believe it's probably the best investment an industrial company can make. And if we're not measuring it, they'll stop making it because they don't know how much value it's driving. Now, these are the things we covered in the last seminar. To solve this problem, to break down these barriers, we actually have to reverse the order to a certain degree. We have to start by measuring business value, because if you can measure this business value, it will actually expose the weaknesses in the other three. So what I'd like to do is start at the bottom, start by talking about how you go about measuring business value. Now, before I do, it's critically important for you all to understand that the cost accounting systems that are commonly used in industrial plants today do not have the time or space resolution to tell you the economic value that's being driven by any improvement, whether we're talking about an automation system improvement, training operators, whatever we do to drive bottom line improvements into a plant, the cost accounting systems do not have the resolution to tell what the value is. And the reason is the cost accounting systems were set up for the plant as a whole, so they look at the entirety of the plant, no subset of it, and they were set up on a monthly period. During a monthly time frame, if you implement advanced controls or a new control system, odds are pretty good that 40 or 50 other things have been implemented during that month. And so when the accountants get back and report on the performance of the month, they're not really able to discern which of those 30 or 40 things that happened added value or detracted value. It's invisible. So we've got to get better at that. So we have to help the accountant to measure the value. The way we do this is a technique called real-time accounting. What we have to do is take the accounting modules, the accounting equations that are created by the accounting department to measure the management of the facility and bring them down to the process unit or work cell level in real time. If we can get them down to the process unit or work cell level and make the calculations happen in real time, then we can really start accounting for things in a way that makes the value of what we do visible. Now, it's critically important that you understand I'm not talking about key performance indicators that have economic attribution to them. Over the past 30 years, a lot of engineers have tried to fix accounting by establishing new ways of accounting, by developing KPI and saying this is the amount of money this KPI is worth. I'll tell you right now, having interviewed hundreds of chief financial officers, there is no credibility to key performance indicators, even if they have an economic indicator in them. What the accounting team needs are accounting metrics the way they account for the plant. This is the way the managers are dealt with. So I've actually had one CFO say to me, if one more engineer comes in with one more KPI to tell me how much money he's made me, I'll fire him. It's just not what we need. What we have to do is take the accounting discipline down to the plant floor. The accountants can't do that, by the way. This requires engineering talent. This requires people that understand what the plant floor is like. We have to have a database that will allow us to populate these models, these accounting models, with real-time data. The good news is we do have that database. That database is in the form of sensors, flows, levels, temperatures, pressures, speeds, compositions, whatever the sensors are, they're being calculated or they're being discerned in real time through into the automation environment. What we need to do is use that data to model the real-time accounting of the operation. Now, when we take a look at the way the finance team looks at capital investments, they look at it from a strict return on investment point of view. Historically, the return on investment, this is a classic textbook ROI model. Return on investment has two basic components to it. A cost component, which is shown in the bar chart on this graphic, and a benefit component, which is shown as the blue dotted dashed line at the top of the chart. In order to calculate return on investment, you need to take the integral of both the cost and the benefit, and you subtract cost from benefit to figure out what the return is going to be. Unfortunately, in industry today, the benefit is somewhat, the cost is somewhat measured. Most clients we go into kind of know what they pay for automation, especially if they hire a systems integrator, because they buy the product from a vendor, they buy the engineering from the systems integrator, they know what they paid at least at the upfront of the cost cycle. But unfortunately, the corresponding measures of benefit are not being made. So what goes on is financial people are expecting some calculation of return on investment. All they get is the cost. This is what it cost me, and they don't get the benefit. So automation is being relegated to a cost with no benefit. What we need to do is start measuring the benefit in order to be able to effectively calculate return on investment as we go forward. Now, to do this, what we look at is the way these functions line out in industrial operations. We got a number of C-level executives together, and we asked them to draw this picture of how they see functionality lining out in industrial operations. And what we found is they look at things in three levels: real-time, control level, the production planning and scheduling level, and then the business level. And unfortunately, what the executives know is they're only measuring the top level. So anything that occurs at the process control, the production planning and scheduling level, that's the MBS level for some of you, or the advanced process control level, doesn't get measured by the reporting system or the measurement system that's in place. So what we need to do is fill that gap. We need to fill that measurement vacuum. The way we do that is by using the census to model both KPIs and real-time accounting measures. Now, I want to be very careful here because a few minutes ago, I told you to be careful and not just assign economic values to key performance indicators and think you solved the problem. That doesn't mean that KPIs aren't important. KPIs are operational measures. They're measures of the performance of the operation, and they're very important. By the way, real-time accounting measures are measures of the finances of the operation. They're also very important. What you need to do is model both of them right down in the control system. By the way, most of the time we do this right in the controllers. If you look at a controller of a DCS or even the HMI above a PLC, whatever you're looking at, they allow you to do real-time algorithm execution. Now, that algorithm could be a control algorithm like proportional interval and derivative, but it could also be constructed through calculation blocks or whatever you might have in those control environments to be whatever model you want it to be. It could be, pounds per hour, a key performance indicator. It could be production value, the value of the product being produced, which is a real-time accounting measure. It could be the cost of consumed energy, which is a real-time accounting measure. What you do is you want to model all of those right down in the controllers using sensor-based data, using data from SAP or whatever your ERP system is to give you the financial context, and then you calculate them. You have these little models running in the controllers. You can historize them, put them into a standard process historian, and then what you can do is put them through a strategic prioritization process. The one that I find the most effective is called the Volman decomposition process. I'm not going to go through the details of this because it takes about an hour and a half to get through that by itself. I have written a couple of books on this. One is called Bottom Line Automation, and the other is called The Value of Automation, that go through the specifics of that process. But what that process does is it starts with the plant's manufacturing strategy, and it figures out what the key objectives are in priority order of the strategy, what the key action plans are, and if action plans are done effectively, then they're measurable. And so you can figure out what the measures of the action plans are. So by doing that, you can figure out what we call dynamic performance measures of the operation. Dynamic performance measures are the combined real-time accounting measures and key performance indicators prioritized to the current manufacturing strategy. And the reason the prioritization is important is when you empower people, when you tell operators or maintenance managers or supervisors or engineers, what you give them feedback on how to do their job, they need to know what the most important aspect of their job is, what the most important measure is, what the second, what the third is, so that when they make a change, they can watch those measures in real time on real-time dashboards and figure out where they're having a positive effect on the dynamic performance measures and where they're having a negative effect. So we went through a lot of this before. What I'd like to do is talk about how you make those, how you actually build those real-time accounting measures in particular. Again, getting back to the measurement vacuum, what you really need to do is use the sensors in the plant to model the KPIs and the real-time accounting measures in the control system. That's either in the controllers or in the software associated with the human-machine interface if you're in a PLC environment. Put those up into a process historian. Almost every plant I've been in has a standard process historian, whether it's OSI Pi, Info Plus 21, or the Wonderware historian. There's just bunches of historians out there that you can use. Historize those measures up, and what you have is not only the real-time models running, but you also have a trend that's stored in a history file that you can make use of. Now, the question is, how do I actually design real-time accounting measures? We've developed a very structured process for doing that. And if you follow this process, you can actually break it down into such reasonable categories, that the actual construction of the model becomes very simple. So I want to walk through the process that we use. There are examples of this, specific case studies in the book Bottom Line Automation, or I could get you some if you'd like. But what we typically do is you have to send a consulting team or an engineering team to site to figure out what the real-time accounting models look like. I want to be clear. We cannot build these models for the client. This is going to be teamwork. The client has to be part of this process. So if you're going to go help them put the real-time accounting models in, you've got to get an agreement from the site that you're going to send a team out that understands the process, but the client is going to bring a team too that understands their business, and it's that joint team that's going to be able to define and design these models. So what we typically do is we get agreement from the executives that we want to put these real-time accounting models in, and we set up a visit to site. When we set up the visit to site, before we ever show up on site, we make sure that we understand who we're going to be meeting with. We typically start with the top business person on site, and we set up a visit schedule so that everybody knows exactly what time we're going to be with them. And the reason we do this is most industrial sites are making products. They don't have an awful lot of spare time to be doing a lot of other things. So out of respect for the client's time, we make sure we have a very rigorous schedule set up. Once we get the schedule set up, we do a data collection process where we go out to their historian, we look at their P&IDs, we try to figure out what the process flows are. We get a good understanding of the plant before we go out there. We do a resource identification and schedule. What individual people are we going to need? We usually ask for a single engineer from the site to be part of this team at every step of this process. But we may also need some accounting people to be part of those resources. We may want a plant walkthrough. If you want a plant walkthrough to get comfortable with the plant, you may have to schedule those right up front. So we typically start with the process walkthrough of the part of the plant that we're going to be doing the analysis on, just to give us context. Now, your system's integrated. Very often, you'll have already obtained the familiarity with the process before this. But if you haven't, the client really likes doing process walkthroughs. I've seen very few clients who aren't really excited to show off their plant. And once you schedule the process walkthrough, you've identified all the resources, then you get them all in a room together. And, you know, what we do is we kick the whole day off by getting everybody in a room together. We tell them what's going to happen for the rest of the day. The reason this is important is you're going to have the top person on site, whether it's the plant manager, the site manager, in a room with everybody else you're going to be talking to. Some of those may be operators, some of those may be accounting people. It's important for these people to see that this is sponsored by the executives at that site. So having this initial presentation is critically important. And what we present at the initial presentation is what we're going to be doing for the rest of this project. So going to the second phase of the operation, once the presentation is over, we go through a decomposition analysis. We call this an accounting decomposition analysis. We start with the accountants, and we say to them, every month when you report the results of this plant, what are the equations? What are the algorithms? Don't just give me hand-waving things like we do contribution margin. I want to know the exact equation you use to report results from this plant. You've got to get those equations in writing and accepted by the accountant. Then what we do is they're the equations for the overall plant. We go into each of the sub-areas of the plant, whether you're talking to, let's say the plant has 3 plant areas. We go to each of the 3 plant areas, and we try to determine with the accountant what is the contribution that this area provides to that measure. What's the contribution that the second area provides? So at the end, you end up with a calculation, an equation at the area level that shows its contribution to the overall measures that accounting is using, and then you do a second level of decomposition down to the work cells or down to the units, so that when you're done, you have little equations on paper, written on paper, little equations for each of the process units, for each of the work cells, that tells you exactly the way the contribution of those units to the accounting within the plant. Now, I want to be clear. When you recombine these, it's not always addition, because when you decompose a plant like this, you get a little bit of double counting, and you have to do some analysis of different units and what the real contribution is. The important thing is not that. The important thing is you do this with the accounting personnel. So when you're done establishing these equations right down at the process unit level, the accountants themselves bless them. The accountants say, yes, this equation represents the value that we get out of this process unit. This is all done on paper. Once you've done that, we stop and we look at the equations we've developed and we do a source data analysis. That means if we have an equation and one of the terms of the equation is energy consumption, how am I going to determine energy consumption over any given time period? Is there a way of taking 3 or 4 temperature meters and calculating the actual consumed energy? If one of my terms is the price of energy, how am I going to discern the price of energy over that time period? And I got to tell you, this is a challenge, because sometimes the immediate thought you have is I'm going to go up to the ERP system, because the ERP system must have the price of energy. In the open energy grid today, the open electricity grid in the United States, the price of energy changes every 15 minutes. And in most plants I've been in, the ERP system is not updated every 15 minutes. So if you go to the ERP system to get energy price, very often you're getting a bad piece of data, an old piece of data. What you want to do sometimes, what we have to do sometimes, is actually connect onto the energy grid, which is much easier than you may think it is. If you call the local utility or the local grid manager and say, I need to get the cost of energy as it changes every 15 minutes or half hour or whatever it is, how do I do it? Very often they'll say, look, what we'll do is we'll send you a message, we'll send you a spreadsheet, whatever it is, they'll tell you how to get that source data. So once you get the equation done, you have to do a source data analysis. That's very important. Then you do the accounting model design. Now that I have the source data, I know what equation I want to do. How do I design the accounting model within the automation environment? In other words, do I need to build a calculation block in the controller? Do I need to build an application object in the HMI? How do I design the model? And once you've designed the model, you implement. And you've got the real-time accounting equations running. You typically assign them to a historian on whatever time frames the client wants to assign them, and you've got your little real-time accounting system running. It's not visible at this point, but it's running, which means now if you have it running and it's historized and it's validated by the accountant, you go in and do whatever it is you do at that plant. You go in and put advanced control. You put a new control strategy in. You put a new PLC in. You can go into the historian, look at what the economic performance was of that part of the plant prior to the event that you did, prior to the improvement. Then you can look at what the results are after the improvement, and you can literally integrate those results and figure out exactly what the economic impact was. You can actually calculate the return on investment after you make that engagement. So this is the process to put in real-time accounting. Once you've got the real-time accounting in, you can use it to reverse the other blockage. So what we want to do is take down those other value blockers, those other barriers to value, because we're able to measure value. The first one is the project team. If we work up the 4 blockers in order, how do we extend the project team approach to include value? Well, when I talked to you 2 months ago, I went down through a project team approach, and I want to walk through it again. But on this slide, I'm going to insert in green some incremental things that we can negotiate with the client in order to get the value from the project team. So when we look at the capital budget approach, the plant applies for capital, as we said before, and estimates the return on investment. Once they estimate the return on investment, they produce a specification, which is the basis for the RFP, and what they should do at that point is add the real-time accounting metrics into the scope of that investment and estimate the value improvement. So when you're doing the ROI, you've got the real-time accounting measures there on which you can actually estimate the value improvement. If the capital is improved, then you move forward with the project team. You assign the project team, but you add a third measure of performance: on time, on budget, plus value provided, performance measure. If you do that, the project team can look around, look at the technology that's been acquired, look at the system of the software, and recognize that there are some features that would drive tremendous amounts of value, and actually use those and implement those. Now, this is a very tough balancing act, and I know I'm talking to systems integrators who are very knowledgeable about project execution. The problem you've got when you start putting a value provided performance measure in is you can get scope creep in a project very quickly. This requires strong project management. The project management has to sit on top of this, and the project engineers may come in and say, look, there's this feature in this system that we bought. If I activate the feature, it looks like it'll make $700,000 a year of bottom line value for the client. It'll take me about 8 hours to do. Can we add it or can't we add it? See, because the project team is still going to be measured on time, on budget, but we need to give them a little bit of degrees of freedom to solve this. This is going to be tough when we start up, because when you first start up, there's going to be a lot of skepticism in this, and no client likes project creep. On the other hand, if they actually start seeing measurable economic value to their bottom line, this will be huge and will start to really change the whole process. So you add that in there, and then when the project is executed, we have to add the step of value determination. Even though the real-time accounting measures may be working in the background, calculating the value you have, it's up to the project team to take that information, go back to plant management and say, look, we executed this project for you. It cost you $1.5 million, but look at the return. We were able to generate an additional $3 million for you a year, gave you a 100% return in 6 months. Is there any investment you can make that's better than that? By the way, there isn't, but the first thing plant management will do, of course, is turn to their accountant. And they'll say, hey, this project team said that they made me 100% return in 6 months. Is that the way you see it, accountant? If the accountants say no, it didn't happen. But because we included the accountants right up front when we did the real-time accounting analysis, they're not going to say no. These are their measures. They'll be sitting next to you and saying, yes, they did get this money. So what's the next thing the plant manager is going to do? He's going to say, how can I direct more capital toward these projects? How can I direct more capital to this systems integrator, because this systems integrator is getting me a lot of value? So that's the way you change the project team approach. How do we break down the barrier that we call replacement automation and make it value automation? Again, going back to the original presentation a few months ago, traditional automation projects are primarily brownfield and tend to be exact replacement projects. What we need to do is extend these projects, extend the project process for automation requests, so that right up front, when a plant is making a request for capital to do an automation project, they consider including members of the project team, members of the project group that will ultimately be executing this project. Because you got to remember, the project group wants to be measured on the value created, so if they can get involved way up in the capital budget process, they can start identifying things before the capital is applied for, and actually maybe even adjust the capital application request, things that drive value. This is huge, because by bringing the project team in up front, the project team feels committed to the plant, the project team feels committed to value, but they also have put themselves on the line to drive value. So you include them. You determine the value metrics for the project before you even apply for capital. So when you're applying for capital, right in the application for capital, it says we are going to measure the return by measuring this, and this in real time, historizing it, and we'll get a weekly, monthly, daily report, whatever it is you want, that shows the return on capital. You get a collaborative agreement between the project team and the plant people on the scope and value of the project. So if you go out for a budgetary estimate, and the client goes out for a budgetary estimate, and the estimate comes in at $1 million, that you might sit together and say, you know something, to put the real-time accounting measures, to put all that stuff in, we need to add another $200,000. So instead of being $1 million, it's $1.2 million, but the value it drives is tremendous and through the roof. You got to remember, from a financial perspective, it's not the amount of capital that's important. It's how quickly that capital is recaptured in the organization through return on investment. Then you develop a value-based automation capital request. The capital request actually emphasizes measurable business value. You start with a capital budget request, but then in that request, you have the capital value measurement specification, how much value it will create, and the capital budget ROI justification, which will now be made measurable. So you're breaking down the traditional processes and making them more effective. But I also recommend that instead of just doing ROI analysis, all of us can get caught up in ROI analysis. It's the way capital has traditionally been viewed. But you've got to remember, when we put in the solutions we put in, we don't only get an initial return, we also get sustained results. When you do an ROI analysis, you stop counting when you've recaptured the value of the project. But the value you've generated keeps going and going. So we've got to go from pure ROI to a cash flow analysis. And I'll show you what that means. And by the way, the history, if you can start doing these things, the history, the case studies are phenomenal. I've redrawn the capital ROI curves here, and you'll notice that the cost is much smaller and the benefit is much higher. And the reason I've drawn them this way is because over the life cycle of a good automation solution, a value-generating automation solution, the amount of value you capture is so much greater. The amount of benefit you get is so much greater than the cost you spend that it's incredible. So you might say, what do you mean the amount of benefit? Where do the benefits come from? It's very simple. In a real-time environment, they come from an increase in production value. That's the value of the products produced. So it's the amount of product you produce times the value of the product. Historically, we've only measured throughput. We've got to measure both the amount of product we produce times the economic value of the product. There's different ways of discerning that, but by working with the accountant, you can come up with an agreement on what the value of the product should be, how we're going to discern that. Then you look at energy cost. Energy cost is the amount of energy consumed times the price of the consumed energy as you're consuming it. Seeing that the price changes every 15 minutes, you can't just use a single statistic. You have to continually calculate the energy cost savings. And by doing that, you get a much more accurate view of the impact you're having on energy costs than you would even through your ERP system. And the same is true for material costs. The amount of material consumed times the cost of the material is consumed. These are the three key elements of benefit. These are the three things that automation solutions and systems impact most directly. And I got to tell you something, the numbers get big very quickly. On average, when we started doing real-time accounting projects, our average 100% return on investment came in at 3 months or less. What that means is you get a 400% return in a year. If you go to a chief financial officer of any industrial company and you show them that you can get those types of returns, they're going to say, my goodness, I can't get that return anywhere else in industry. I need to spend more money here. I need to invest more here. You see, what's going on right now is when you look at the capital budget of major industrial companies, less than 5% goes to automation solutions. In some companies, it's way less than 5%. And the reason is they don't think they're getting the return from automation that they really are getting or they could be getting. If we can show them that we can give them unsurpassed returns. By the way, if you can show them a 50% return in 1 year, that's still better than any investment they can make. They'll start redirecting capital from buying storm windows on the plant in northern Michigan to automation. And that's when our business really starts to grow. That's what we're looking for. By the way, if your cost over the life of an automation system is X, the benefit can be 1,000 times that. People start talking about lowering the cost of automation. but look at this. We should lower the cost of automation. We should do whatever we could do. But look at this. This chart tells us what we should be really focused on is increasing the visible performance of automation. Economically, that's a much better play. We're all being squeezed. Everybody wants us to cut our costs, to strip down projects to their lowest common denominator. We need to turn this around because we're good. We could drive value for clients if we make it visible. Now, I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, you have to change your thinking, I believe, from an ROI point of view to a cash flow point of view. What I've drawn here is a cash flow diagram. And what I have, that the vertical dashed line represents the point in the project schedule where you get 100% return. You see, when you do a project, when a client does a project, they spend money to do the project. They buy products, they spend money on a systems integrator. So the actual economics for a project during the project cycle are negative. You know, they're spending money with no benefit. When the project is up and running, they start to get benefit. And as they start to get benefit, they reach a point at which they've recovered or they've captured 100% of the cost that they've spent to that point. And that's, with ROI analysis, that's where they stop counting. Notice something. If they stop counting at that point, then we, as an industry, are always either negative or zero economically. We can't stop counting at that point. When you look at the automation solutions we put in, they continue to add value. As a matter of fact, you see this curve in textbooks. They continue to add value many times more than the cost of what you spend. Now, the question on this curve that I always ask is, why does it pump up and then decline again as time goes along? There's no excuse for that, except that we take our eye off the ball. If we make the real-time accounting measures and KPIs visible and we provide dashboards, the actual experience will look more like this. Not only does it continue to provide value, but it continues to increase in value. And that's where you get the many multiples of cost. By the way, chief financial officers and chief executive officers think from the point of view of cash flow. So if we can show them the positive cash flow we're creating, if you put advanced process control in on a particularly difficult unit, that solution continues to pay back for years and years and years. We should never stop counting. We've got to make the value of what we're doing visible. In order to do that, we have to break down some of the traditional mindsets in industry. So what do we need to do? If you look at an overall value engagement process, we have 4 stages. We've already talked about the real-time accounting stage. So you start with the engagement. If you want to not only look at real-time accounting, but also improvements that you create, you follow basically the same process we put up for real-time accounting, but then instead of just doing an accounting decomposition, you do multiple decompositions. The first is strategy. Why do we do a strategy decomposition? That allows us to prioritize the measures, the KPIs and the real-time accounting measures, so that we can build the dashboard for every person in the operation. We should be able to identify for every person in the operation the exact measures of performance and the exact priority of those measures that will measure their effectiveness to the strategy of the company. Then we do a human resources decomposition. That is, we take a look at the different groups within the industrial operation. Operators, if we're going to provide operator dashboards, we need to know a little bit about them. Are they highly experienced? Are they highly educated? Are they brand new? You might present the information very differently depending on the background and experience level of operators. What you'll find is a 25-year experienced operator can handle an awful lot more information than somebody who's new on the job. So as you start building the dashboards, you need to know who you're building them for. Then you go to an accounting decomposition. We already talked about that with the real-time accounting analysis. And then a technology analysis. What technology do they have in place that we might be able to take advantage of because we're systems integrators. We know what this client is doing. We know the technology. We can pull it all together. Once you do that, we do a business improvement diagnostic. This is if you want to actually go through with the client on a consultancy basis and figure out where you can actually apply automation solutions to drive more and more business improvement. We start that with a bottleneck or a constraint analysis. Elihu Goldratt, in his book, theory of constraints goes through very nicely how to do a constraint analysis. You look around the operation, you find out where the performance constraints are around production value, energy cost, and material cost. Determine if you were able to free that constraint. Sometimes that may be just putting in a bigger pump, for heaven's sake. If you're able to free that constraint, how much additional throughput would you get, and what's the value of that throughput? You can identify all the areas where constraints are and open them up. You see, this is a much more healthy way to look at automation than just my old automation system is getting old, so I have to replace it. We want to replace it for a reason. And when you replace it, you should replace it to free up constraints. You do historical data analysis. You go through their process historian, and that's how you figure out if you free this constraint up, what additional value might you be able to get. You do an opportunity identification and valuation. In other words, if there are 6 things you identify that will free up constraints, which ones are the most important, second, third? How do you figure that out? How much is it going to cost to free that constraint up? 1. And how much value will it create if you free it up? Then you go to the client and you say, here are 6 things we can do for you. Here's the cost of the first one and the value of the first one. Here's the cost of the second one and the value of the second one. Let the client figure out which ones they want to do. It turns you from being just a project executor to being a value-based consultant. And then you recommend improvement target areas. If you walk in and you see something that's very low cost and very high value, it's low-hanging fruit, you recommend that, you do that first. Why? Once you've done one of these and it becomes visibly measurable, your company becomes a value partner to your client. Instead of just being a systems integrator in the traditional sense, a project executor, your client starts thinking of you as a necessary component of their business. And once that happens, your company business starts to grow. And then finally, you design the solution and you deliver it. You review the findings with the executives so that they can make the determination as to what you're going to do. You get the approval to proceed on whatever aspects of the project you're going to do. You do a detailed solution design, and then you execute. Once you execute, you make sure that the executives see the value that's created. This is a specific value engagement process. It works effectively. It's step by step. It changes who you are in your client's mind, and that's what we're trying to accomplish through this. And by the way, if you'll notice, that last little loop is a continuous improvement loop. Once you've done the first or second of these engagements, you go back to executives and say, look, we identified 6. There's 4 more that we could do. And you start getting into this continuous improvement loop, which continuously improves your client's business while continually getting your company more and more revenue because you're working closely with the client. So what do? We can change the way business is done around automation, automation systems, and automation software by, 1, making the value of what we do measurable. We do that through real-time accounting measures. 2, working closely with clients' management to adjust a capital budget process so that value becomes a component of the capital budget process. Most executives think they've done that by going to ROI approaches, but we've got to point out the flaw in the thinking and how we can fix that. By the way, if you just point out that the traditional ROI analysis doesn't work and you have no way of fixing it, the executives don't want to talk to you. But if you can show them that it doesn't work and you have a way of fixing it, that makes, again, you a partner with them. Adjust the project team process so that the most valuable people in the industry, whether the project team comes from your company's systems integrators or the client's companies, they're the most valuable people in industry. Measure them on the value they can generate and train project managers how to balance on time, on budget, on value delivery. Those are the things we have to do. And most importantly, when we create value, make sure management sees the value we create. Make sure they understand how much economic value we've created for them. This will change everything. This will change the relationship between us and the client's management. It will change the amount of capital that they invest in automation solutions, and it will certainly change your revenue profile. And finally, you change to a results focus. Whenever you're talking to the client, your whole vernacular, your language is results language. I'm not here to shove technology down your throat. That's the technology focus, the first of the barriers we talked about. I'm here for one reason and one reason only, and that's to get you better results. And if that's the way your client sees you, they'll love you, and you'll be able to have ongoing relationships with them, and you'll create a healthy business environment for them and for you. So thank you very much for spending the last 45 minutes with me. I appreciate it, and I'd be glad to take any questions at this point. I don't think we're getting any questions, but
at the beginning, we asked for people to put their questions in the Q&A box, and I don't see any questions. Just one comment here saying, no questions, excellent presentation.
Well,
thank you, Tom.
Thank you. I felt like I didn't take a breath for the last half hour. There's a lot of material to get out in a very short amount of time, but that's one of the reasons we wrote the book, is so we could document this material. So anybody interested in going into a deeper dive into how this is done, those two books published by the International Society of Automation, Bottom Line Automation and The Value of Automation. The Value of Automation just came out this year. Those two books go into this in some detail. So if there are no more questions, I want to thank you all, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Okay. So this is Jose again. To all the attendees, thank you for your participation. I'm sure that you have several valuable takeaways. Peter, thank you very much for the contribution of your time and expertise. Your presentation was very insightful, as always. We wish the best for you and Schneider Electric. Keep up the good work, and we look forward to having you at our Executive Conference in Puerto Rico next year. Thanks again to our host and sponsor, John Weber and Monica Anderson of Software Toolbox. Be sure to complete the survey for today's webinar. This is new. You will be directed automatically at the end of this webinar to a site to provide the input. It only takes 30 seconds to complete, and your feedback is really important to us to continue our improvement efforts at CSIA. In closing, here's a list of 2 important considerations. One is we represent the automation industry, and if we don't lead the charge to provide better financial value tracking to justify automation investments in the future, who will? And how do you plan to start implementing the lessons you learned today in your sales approach and value delivery to your clients? Finally, if you have a suggested topic for a webinar, please include it in the survey comments. This is Jose Rivera, CSIA CEO. Thanks again for attending, and goodbye.